Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to Working Together Live, a show about equity in the workplace with the leaders changing the face of business. It seems like everyone these days is focused on diversity in business, and yet venture capital is still falling behind. Female founders received just 2% of VC dollars last year. That's the smallest percentage since 2016, if you can believe it. And those numbers are much smaller for female founders of color. How do we get more funding in the hands of founders who are not white and male? Joining me now is Olivia Owens. She is IFundWomen's Vice President of Entrepreneur Success. She is also the creator and general manager of IFundWomen of Color. Prior to joining IFundWomen, she was a benefits and leave specialist at Under Armour. She got her BA in journalism from the University of Maryland College Park. Olivia, welcome to Working Together Live.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
It's so great to see you. I've been looking forward to this conversation. You were a founding member of IFundWomen, which is such a cool experience to have. I'd love to just kind of hear how you got started working with them.
Absolutely. So my mom is an entrepreneur. I've watched her travel this entrepreneurship journey for the majority of my life, and also watched her struggle to access capital for her business. And it wasn't until she found IFundWomen when we were in our first year that she was able to leverage an alternative funding source like crowdfunding to raise $30,000 for her business. And through that, I got introduced to IFundWomen's founder and CEO, Karen Khan, and came on as a social media freelancer. And 4 years later, we are here continuing to fund women entrepreneurs.
That's such a cool story, and not one that we hear a lot on the show. What's your mom's business? Is she's still working on it?
Still at it. Her business is Wealthy You. She is teaching Black women how to build wealth by investing their money. She was in the investment space in her career and kind of got tired of seeing the information not trickle down to the people who needed it most. And so she created a solution to do just that.
Wow, that's awesome. So it sounds like you had a front row seat to all the issues that we are going to discuss today on the show, which led you, after joining the team, to create and then become the general manager of IFundWomen of Color. Talk to us about the specific need there and why you decided to create that program within the company.
For sure. So in our third year of business, we took a look at the data and recognized that while women of color represented 70% of the women in our community, they only represented 30% of the funds being raised. We see a similar funding disparity play out across other funding options. And we said, not on our watch. This is something that we can address and tackle. And so we launched IFundWomen of Color to address the unique obstacles that women of color face when it comes to launching and growing a business, and crowdfunding specifically. Crowdfunding requires you to leverage your network. And so if you don't feel like you have a network you can turn to, it can feel like an inaccessible tool. And then it also kind of flips everything we've been taught on its head. It's not about putting your head down, grinding it out, working really hard. Crowdfunding asks you to put your idea out there and ask people to believe in you, and not just believe in you, but pay you money for it. And so with IFundWomen of Color, we've been able to accelerate women of color to launch, leverage crowdfunding, and proud to share that in our first year, we were able to move the needle on our cumulative funding volume. Women of color now represent 51% of the funds raised on the platform, and excited to do some research and figure out where we're landing in year two, because it's definitely continuing to grow.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about crowdfunding, because we can talk all day, and I'm sure we will spend part of this interview talking about what's going on with venture capital, but we do know that that's a source of money right now that just isn't working for women. It's not working for women of color. Talk to us why crowdfunding you think is a solution that could lead more women to be able to be successful with their businesses.
Absolutely. So the majority of the new businesses being started in this country every day are being started by women of color. So that 70% that I was talking about are early stage entrepreneurs who are typically raising their first round of capital. And we see crowdfunding as a low risk, debt free way to prove demand for your product or service before you go into supply. Our biggest thing is don't go into debt, funding the earliest stages of your startup, because we know the majority of startups fail. And so we're all about failing fast and failing cheap if you have to. But crowdfunding really gives you the flexibility to test out that idea, put it out to your network, see what they're willing to pay for, what price points they're interested in hitting, and then take that insight and leverage it to push your business further and start to grow from there.
And something that I'm thinking about right now, and I always think about when we have these conversations, is the research is there. If you look at, I don't know, first round reviews saying that startups with a female founder perform 63% better than those without. How has the research been there for so long and we still see the numbers moving, particularly for the larger checks coming out of venture capital firms, private equity firms, moving at such a glacial pace? And in some cases, like last year, moving in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. I think it's about meeting these entrepreneurs where they are. We can't create funds that are looking to fund Black women doing businesses at the Series A, Series B stage when they're not even there yet. And I think it's also about understanding the types of businesses that we're launching and why we're launching them. I think back to when my mom was out there pitching her business to a panel of white men who didn't understand why tool and service specific to Black women when it comes to investing your money is necessary. So that's a massive obstacle. But I also think that we are solving the problems that we experience in our lives. And oftentimes that's the fact that hair care hasn't been created with Black women's hair in mind, or makeup hasn't been created with our skin tones in mind. And so we're just carving out our spaces, or carving out the products and services for us. And I think that there's this expectation that we're going to be at the Series A, Series B stage when the system hasn't been set up for us to achieve that yet.
That's such a good point. But the system is changing. And I want to talk about some of the trends about who is around those tables and who is writing those checks. We have some data from Fairview Capital that's showing just the growth that we're seeing in women and minority-owned private equity firms. Do we need hundreds of more? Of course, Olivia. But if you look at this trend, it is growing and growing quite consistently. And now we're at an all-time high here in 2021. I hear what you're saying in that a lot of the women that you work with aren't at a point where, say, you're even ready to raise a seed round or a Series A round. But I'm curious how you've seen this growth impact what the women who work with IFundWomen and what you've seen anecdotally enable in terms of what they've been able to achieve.
We're seeing amazing, really exciting things. We're seeing brands land in Target and Ulta, getting the mass exposure that they're looking for. I think also with what we saw in 2020, kind of a turn of the tide in terms of what it means to support women of color entrepreneurs and amplify their businesses and give them that shelf space. It's really exciting to see. But I think the other challenge there is, what does sustainability look like in that? Inputting $50,000 into an entrepreneur's business and then walking away doesn't necessarily help in terms of being able to determine what projections for the next year will be if that same support or same energy isn't there and doesn't continue. So I think that there's got to be a sustainability conversation tied to the uproar and support for diverse businesses.
I think I read somewhere, and you can correct me, that female founders, they have an okay time raising that seed round, but getting to that Series A is really where we see a ton of drop off in terms of that growth. How do you think about IFundWomen or different programs that IFundWomen presents that could kind of benefit that problem and bridge that gap that we're seeing? There's so many different angles to solve this problem. I think from the founder side, it's having an early conversation about your capital plan. What is your long-term vision for this business? Is this something that you want to scale and exit, or is this something that you want to continue to run years and years down the line, have it be a legacy for your family? Based on that desire, that's how you build your capital plan. And venture capital may not be the route for your business if that's not the route that you want to take. But I think on the other side of it, we also have to be willing to bet on women founders, diverse founders, take the risks on them that the algorithms aren't considering at this point, because there's a limited amount of risks that have been taken. So I think there's got to be a change in how we're evaluating businesses and funding them at those later stages. There definitely has to be a change. And we just talked about how there are more women of color writing checks, and that is great. But of course, if the white men don't get on board and they don't see that this is an opportunity, they don't look at the statistics, don't look at the markets that are undervalued right now, none of this is going to change. Have you seen momentum in terms of men realizing the opportunity here, particularly when it comes to founding women of color?
Definitely. I think there is an energy for it. I think that at some point there's got to be checks signed behind it. But I think we are hopefully moving in the right direction and hopefully start to see some change and some adjustment. But I also think that we're going to continue to see these founders go other routes to push their businesses forward. And we need to be creating those other routes if this one system isn't moving the way that we need it to.
Well, speaking about that system, I do want to bring up a quote that your CEO and founder, Karen Kahn, wrote on LinkedIn last year. She said, "There you have it. The 2020 global pandemic has literally taught the VC world nothing. There have been studies upon studies about how the pandemic disproportionately affected women and people of color. But at the end of the day, the VC community just does not fundamentally care." Those are some strong words from Karen, but I think that they're words that everyone, particularly those who are joining us in the stream, need to hear. Do you agree with that sentiment? And what does that tell you about how far we have to go?
I definitely agree with the sentiment. I think care in Karen's eyes is money. She is all about money talk. So your thoughts, your sympathies, your advice only takes these businesses so far. And at the end of the day, money talks, and we have to see it in the dollars invested.
I definitely agree. Positive trend that we are seeing on LinkedIn. We have data that shows that there was a ginormous uptick in the number of women who are founding businesses during the pandemic. And women of color, as you just noted, make up a lion's share of those women who are founding businesses. When you think back to the pandemic, what do you think spurred so many women to go out on their own?
I think that we recognize that if we want to see the change, we have to make it happen. Nobody's going to do it for us, which we've seen to date. And I think that also the pandemic forced us to reevaluate what we want out of life and the impact that we want to make. And I think that entrepreneurship gives you that ability to solve the problems that we experience, affect the community that you are likely a part of or that you are passionate about supporting. And I think at the end of the day, inherently, we as women of color are here to add value back into our communities. And so we're leveraging entrepreneurship to be able to do that.
Olivia, I'm seeing some folks in the stream who are very excited that you're joining us. Catherine says, "I'm delighted to see Olivia speaking. Glad many will learn about the current state of pitfall funding for #female founders, especially for women of color, and actions we can take to improve gender and racial equity." Catherine, thanks for joining us on Working Together Live. And Olivia, while I have you, I do see some people in the stream asking how they apply to IFundWomen. What are some of the programs that you have right now that some of the women in the stream might be able to participate in?
Absolutely. So very excitingly enough, we just launched a second round of the Crest Dreams to Reality Fund. Crest was the founding partner of IFundWomen of Color, which with an initial $1 million investment. And the Dreams to Reality Fund is a crowdfunding accelerator program to help you prep, launch, and execute a crowdfunding campaign, with Crest being the first funder of your campaign with a $5,000 grant. So the application for that just opened up. Go to ifundwomen.com/Crest to apply. We also have a bunch of different free resources. We have workshops on a weekly basis. We have a free crowdfunding e-course. There's no cost to launch a campaign on IFundWomen, but we do offer one-on-one coaching services if that's something that you're interested in. But there is a wealth of resources and tools to help push you forward. And we're really here to be that support system for you.
That's great. Olivia, I want to go back to something that you said earlier on, which is this idea of meeting women, meeting female founders where they are, as opposed to have them knock on some VC door on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley and ask for $20 million. Talk to us a little bit about why those small checks, particularly at the beginning, are so important as women of color are starting their businesses, because I feel like it's a dialogue that we just don't focus on enough.
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is hard, and it tests every single level of your identity. And I think that a brand like Caress coming in and giving your business a $5,000 check because they really believe in what you're doing helps you as the entrepreneur continue to push forward. And then I think the other side of that is we don't know what we don't know. Oftentimes we're first generation entrepreneurs. And so my biggest mission with IFundWomen of Color is how can we leverage each other to get further faster? If we've already gone through these obstacles, how can we make sure we remove those hurdles for the people coming after us? And so I think whatever valuable education, tools, resources, and funding that we can provide at the earlier stage so that these businesses continue to grow and scale and reach those higher heights is going to be critical for the longevity and again, sustainability of the businesses that are being started by women of color.
We've talked a lot about funding, but of course, that's not just the only barrier that female founders face when they're starting their own business. What are you seeing at IFundWomen as the other barriers that women are facing, women of color in particular, other than access to capital?
Yeah, I think at the core, it's how are we building sustainable business models, making sure that we're thinking revenue first. Again, the value is inherent in the businesses that we're creating, but how can we make sure that we are creating business models that help our businesses grow? We think revenue is the best funding resource that's out there. And we have this chart up here that 70% of women of color cite a lack of access to capital as a top challenge, but about 50% cite a lack of access to coaches and mentors who have been there, done that to show them the way. And then a third cite a lack of access to a support system. I mentioned entrepreneurship is a lonely road. It can be really challenging. And I think that doing this in community, doing this alongside of other people who look like you, who understand what you're going through, allows you to have those vulnerable moments where you can get emotionally validated that this is really hard, but also get that support and cheering that you need to remember that this is something that you are more than capable of doing. And I think that's the beauty of crowdfunding in itself. You don't just walk away with the funding, you walk away with the self-belief that you were able to successfully raise capital for your business. You were able to push through whatever imposter syndrome you were feeling to make the ask. And you were able to build a stronger community from the people who showed up and funded you.
Little goes a long way. Olivia, as we've been talking, I'm just struck by this dichotomy of issues that we're talking about. We're talking about all the issues that women of color face when they're trying to raise capital and grow their business. But on the flip side, more and more women of color are founding businesses every single day. Given all the barriers, given all the challenges, what are you seeing in terms of what is keeping these women going?
Oh, I mean, perseverance is in our DNA. It's ingrained in us from a very, very young age. And I think that level of responsibility that we feel to make an impact, I think is what drives us at our core. It's just really exciting to see different entrepreneurs scale to those heights. And then we have those examples that we can lean back onto. But I also think we need more and more examples of the different types of definitions of success for a business. For one entrepreneur, that may be raising $100 million. For another entrepreneur, that may be getting net positive on your revenue. So I think that the more examples that we can see out there, the more it's going to help us push further and also define what success means to us. But at the end of the day, perseverance is just inherent to who we are.
Well, as a member of the media myself, how much do you blame the media for focusing too much on the few and the far between who have raised that 100 million and not enough on the positive revenue? You can tell it to me straight, tell it to me straight.
Again, I will say that there are so many different angles to this systemic problem. And I definitely think that if the media can get on board with highlighting some of the amazing stories that we're seeing come out of IFundWomen, that will be playing a big role in pushing this issue further.
Well, I'm taking a note of that right now. Olivia, we've talked a lot about the issues, but where are the bright lights? Where are the shining spots that are keeping you in this world, keeping you motivated as well?
I always say that working at IFundWomen is a special kind of instant gratification. We get to be there for our entrepreneurs' wins, the big ones and the small ones, whether that's they finally figure out the wording for their 15-second elevator pitch that resonates with them the most, or they successfully raise the funds through crowdfunding, or they get that first investor, or they sign that deal with Target to get their product on the shelves. We're seeing all of that happen to the entrepreneurs on our platform. And really, since we've been in this game for 5 years, we've been on this entrepreneurship journey with many of our entrepreneurs for 5 years. And to see the heights that they've scaled so far, one example that comes to mind is Khalila Wright from Mess in a Bottle. When she first came to IFundWomen, she's a t-shirt company based in Baltimore. She raised funds because her store was robbed and robbed at gunpoint, and she needed funds to find a new location and a safer place to get her business off the ground. And today she can be found in Targets across the country. So wow. That's just one of the many examples of how we get to be along this ride with them.
One of many. And you just mentioned you've been on this ride for 5 years. And even though I feel like we've talked about these issues so much, particularly diversity and inclusion when it comes to business in the past couple of years, what are we still missing? What are you seeing on the ground that you feel that people who are joining us right now don't know about that you'd like them to know?
I think that we're seeing I think what we did really well with IFundWomen of Color is we listened to the pain points of the entrepreneurs on our platform who weren't getting kind of the return on what IFundWomen was trying to provide them with the crowdfunding platform, and we address that directly. I think that in some of the solutions that are being created, it's not necessarily ingrained in what the entrepreneurs are actually asking for. I think there's a sentiment that women of color are over-mentored and underfunded. That doesn't mean that mentorship isn't valuable, but all we're really asking for is the funds for our business, and not just for charities. Women of color can create for-profit businesses and should be able to get funded for that. And so I think the disconnect is just actually listening to what we're asking for and delivering that on a silver platter. I think that's the smoothest way through.
It sounds like a simple disconnect, but listening is a hard thing to do. Olivia, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I see so many people who are so excited that you did. Angela says, as a female entrepreneur who is raising, this is something I can 100% relate to. And P. Angela says, perseverance is inherent to who we are. I'm so excited we got a chance to meet, and thank you for all your insights on Working Together Live.
Thank you for having me.
That was Olivia Owens. She is the creator and general manager of IFundWomen of Color. And she came on to talk to us about not just the issues, but some of the solutions in terms of getting more capital in the hands of women of color who are making up a wide variety of new businesses that we're seeing come up across the country. So thanks for joining us. Working Together Live is not just a live show. It is also a weekly newsletter that hits your inbox every Wednesday morning. For more on equity in the workplace and the leaders changing the face of business, subscribe by clicking on the link that my team is putting into the stream right now. All right, next week on Working Together Live, Thursdays at 3 Eastern, we'll be speaking with Ashley Hunter. We're going to talk about assessing risk during uncertain times. She's the perfect person to do that. And we'll also talk about how she became one of the few women of color leading in insurance. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thanks for watching.